The movie begins with some muffled production credits, followed by a loud jump scare title screen. We pan into an isolated cottage in the middle of what appears to be a forest, where we meet our main character, Maddie. We learn that she is deaf and mute through the use of background sounds that fade in and out. Maddie receives a visit from her neighbor and friend Sarah, who is bored while waiting for her boyfriend John to come. Maddie is an established author who is presently working on a new book titled Midnight Mass, but she can't decide between one of 7 endings. Sarah and Maddie are talking in sign language outside when the fire alarm goes off, and they rush back into the smoky kitchen. Sarah remarks on how loud the fire alarm is as Maddie removes it. As night falls, Sarah departs, and Maddie declines her dinner invitation due to work obligations. Maddie struggles with writer's block after feeding her cat and considers video contacting her ex-boyfriend, Craig, on her computer. Maddie, on the other hand, walks to the kitchen and cleans up the burnt food from earlier. She doesn't notice a bleeding Sarah run up and pound on her glass door because she has her back to it. Sarah is subsequently injured in the shoulder with an arrow, and the assailant approaches her. Maddie is still unconscious when the assailant savagely stabs and kills Sarah. The attacker realizes Maddie is deaf after killing Sarah and removes Sarah's body away before Maddie sees it. Maddie returns to her computer on the couch to continue typing without noticing the intruder. He pulls out a knife, considers killing her, and then appears to decide to wait. Maddie's sister, Max, video calls her, and the killer flees before either of them notices him. While they're talking, the killer reaches for Maddie's phone on the kitchen counter, which Max sees briefly, but Maddie assures her it was just the cat. She hangs up the phone and searches the house for the cat, eventually giving up but leaving the sliding door open for it. Maddie returns to her PC and receives multiple image messages from her phone. Most importantly, she is not the one who sends them. Maddie notices that someone has broken in and gently approaches to the open sliding door. She notices the assailant standing outside, teasing her with her phone. They both rush to the door, but Maddie is the first to close it. Unable to enter, the killer walks calmly around the home to the electrical panel and switches off the power just as Maddie was attempting to call the police using Wi-Fi from her computer. As Maddie watches, the killer walks over to her car and slashes her tires with a hunting knife. Maddie uses lipstick to write "won't tell, didn't see face, boyfriend coming home" on the glass door and a torch to attract the killer's attention. We know from Maddie's messages that there will be no boyfriend, but maybe the killer will leave because she hasn't seen his face. Oh wait, he instantly removes his mask. After Maddie confirms her ability to read lips, the killer, John Gallagher Jr., reads several messages from her ex-boyfriend, revealing that he knows no one is coming. He then tells her he can murder her whenever he wants, but he just wants to have fun and make her wish she was dead. Maddie, with no other option, grabs a kitchen knife and a hammer and barricades herself in a bedroom. The killer teases Maddie from the window using Sarah's lifeless body, demonstrating that his notion of pleasure is not the same as most people's. Maddie flees the room, overcome by grief at the death of her best friend. Maddie devises a scheme to lure the killer to the front of the home after remembering Sarah puts her mobile phone in her back pocket. She activates her car alarm with her car keys, successfully distracting the killer and bringing him to the front of the house, leaving Sarah's body alone. Maddie investigates the body but is unable to locate the phone before the killer returns and realizes what she is up to. The assailant manages to reach the window before Maddie smashes it shut, but she stabs him in the arm with the claw of her hammer, forcing him to fall back in pain. The killer shows he has Sarah's smashed phone after covering his wound with a portion of her clothing. He taunts Maddie by removing Sarah's earring and puts it in his pocket while placing the phone on her body. Why? Did Maddie give those earrings to Sarah? How could he have known? How would the audience be aware of this? What's the goal of all of this? Maddie runs out of the home and tries to go into the woods, but she is stopped when the killer barely misses her with his crossbow. As the killer reloads, Maddie dashes back to the house, narrowly avoiding an arrow through the spine. Upstairs, Maddie observes the killer patrolling the home and waits for him to arrive at the front door. She sneaks out a back window and throws a torch far into the woods, luring the killer there. Throw a torch around 10 feet away from the home, climb down the side of the house and then flee into the woods before the killer realizes you duped him? He's got a long-range weapon. Maddie creeps around to the front of the house and begins to climb down, but she is hit in the leg by the killer's crossbow. As the killer climbs the trellis to reach Maddie, she pulls the arrow from her leg and punches him, knocking him to the ground and removing his crossbow. Maddie snatches it and hobbles back inside the window, just in time for the killer to climb up and capture her. Crawling to the toilet, Maddie tends to her injured leg and notices 13 notches on the killer's crossbow, indicating that he's a skilled serial killer. We see the killer standing outside the bathroom window observing Maddie as she attempts and fails to reload the crossbow. Someone knocks on the door downstairs, which distracts him. This is revealed to be John, Sarah's boyfriend, who keeps knocking on the door and calling for her. When John notices the lipstick writing on the door, he is about to call the cops when the killer arrives disguised as an undercover cop. The killer tells John that he was responding to a call at the residence when he was knocked out. The killer requests to borrow John's phone and pretends to call for backup before placing the phone in his pocket. This does not fool John, who requests his phone back. The killer justifies it as a habit, but Sarah's earring falls out of his pocket when he pulls the phone out. That explains why the killer strangely took Sarah's earring. It was so another character in the future could realize he's not who he claims to be. Now suspicious, John informs the assailant that he has just remembered there is a spare key under a planter near the porch. As the killer approaches to look for it, John grabs a large rock and prepares to attack. John is distracted at that very moment by Maddie, who bangs on the door to catch his attention. This gives the assassin the opportunity to stab. The killer taunts John as he falls to the ground, bleeding out, but John finds a second wind and tackles the attacker. As Maddie watches from the house, John gains the upper hand and chokes the killer. Maddie stumbles to the front door and flees out into the woods. Meanwhile, John dies as a result of being stabbed in the neck, and the killer pursues Maddie. He quickly catches up to her and bashes her in the head with a rock, killing her. This is Maddie acting out what would have happened if she had run out the front door. Maddie sits down and we see her chatting to herself, in her head, playing out every possible situation and what might happen. Maddie determines that bringing the fight to the killer is her best bet because it's the last thing he'd expect. Outside, Maddie's cat has finally arrived, but the killer notices it. Maddie shoots him in the shoulder with the crossbow just as he's ready to kill it. The killer pursues Maddie while the cat flees. Despite being able to enter the house, she drops an arrow just outside the door and reaches for it, allowing the killer to slam the door on her arm. Before she can pull her hand back in, he stomps on it, breaking multiple fingers. The killer mocks her and tells her he's on his way in. Maddie puts on her game face and writes "Do it, coward" on the glass with her own blood. The assassin takes a crowbar from Maddie's car and begins smashing the glass door. Meanwhile, Maddie uses her laptop to type up a description of the man and a message to her family as the killer begins banging the door in with a tire iron. Taking a knife, Maddie dashes inside the restroom, bracing herself for the arrival of the assassin. She doesn't notice the killer coming from a window behind her while she waits and begins to fade from blood loss. As he approaches her neck, he pulls out a knife and taunts her. Maddie feels his breath as he giggles and is able to dodge his attack and stab him into the kitchen, where she collapses from blood loss. As the killer approaches, she sprays him in the face with bug spray and activates her fire alarm. This severely disorients him, and he drops his knife. As he falls back, he collides with several objects on a nearby table, including a corkscrew. Maddie grabs his knife, but he catches her and throws her to the ground before she can attack. Maddie bites his hand as they struggle, but he manages to jump on top of her and choke her. As Maddie begins to pass out, she reaches over, grabs the corkscrew, and stabs the murderer in the neck. Maddie takes her cell phone from the body of the man and contacts 911. The film ends with Maddie sitting outdoors, watching the cops arrive and her cat appearing as if nothing had happened. And that's a wrap on this week's movie review. Thanks for watching. Remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode.